Picture this. You're trying to cross a busy street in literally any American city. You wait at the corner like a good citizen, hit the little button, watch the countdown timer tick down from 15 seconds like it's defusing a bomb, then sprint across 4 lanes of traffic while cars rev their engines at you like you're personally ruining their day. And somewhere in the back of your mind, you think this is normal, that streets are for cars, sidewalks are for people, and anyone caught in between is basically asking for it. But here's the thing that'll mess with your head. None of this was inevitable. Streets weren't always car sewers with pedestrian crossing zones sprinkled on top like safety confetti. Someone had to invent the idea that an 8-year-old kid playing in the street was the problem, not the 2-ton metal box flying through a neighborhood at 30 miles per hour. Someone had to convince an entire country that walking across a street wherever you wanted wasn't a basic human right, but a crime called jaywalking, and that someone was very, very good at their job. This is the story of the greatest public space heist in American history. How streets went from belonging to everyone to belonging to whoever could afford a car. How children went from playing in roads to being banned from them. And how we all learned to accept that the exhaustion, isolation, and constant background fear of getting flattened by a pickup truck while buying groceries was just the price of modern life. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. By the way, my name is Patrick. If you like the sort of content I'm making here, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It helps out a lot. Now back to the video. Before cars took over, American streets were basically the internet of their day. Kids played stickball between horse-drawn carts. Vendors hawked food from pushcarts. People strolled, gathered, argued about politics, and generally treated the street like what it was: public space that belonged to everyone. Sure, there were rules and some chaos, but the default assumption was pretty simple. Streets served people, and people used them however they needed to. Then cars showed up, and everything went to hell really fast. We're talking about the 1910s and 1920s here, when automobile ownership exploded from rich guy novelty to middle-class aspiration practically overnight. Suddenly, these 1,000-pound machines were sharing space with kids and grandparents and dogs, except nobody had figured out how that was supposed to work. The result was exactly as horrifying as you'd expect. Traffic deaths skyrocketed. Kids were getting mowed down in staggering numbers. By the early 1920s, car crashes had become the leading cause of death for children in most American cities. Parents were furious. Newspapers ran headlines like "Motorcar Slaughter" and published photos of mangled bicycles on front pages. The public was ready to do something drastic about these death machines terrorizing their neighborhoods, so cities started fighting back. Cincinnati put a referendum on the ballot in 1923 that would have required every car to have a mechanical speed governor, basically a device that would physically prevent cars from going faster than 25 miles per hour. Similar proposals popped up in cities across the country. The message was clear. If cars couldn't coexist safely with people, then cars needed to slow down, get restricted, or get out. And that's when the automobile industry realized they had a problem. Not a safety problem, mind you, a business problem. See, if cities started treating cars like the dangerous machines they actually were, it was going to be really hard to sell the whole freedom of the open road fantasy. Speed limits, safety devices, restricted access to downtown areas. None of that was going to move inventory off dealer lots. So the auto industry, along with car clubs, tire companies, and everyone else making money off America's new car obsession, got together and basically said, we need to change the conversation. Instead of asking why cars were killing people, they would make people ask why people were getting killed by cars. It was brilliant, evil, and it worked perfectly. The first step was legal. Throughout the 1920s, auto industry groups pushed model traffic laws that redefined what streets were for. Instead of shared public spaces where vehicles were guests, streets became primarily vehicle corridors where pedestrians were trespassers. New laws required pedestrians to cross only at designated spots and yield to vehicle traffic. The legal assumption flipped completely. Cars had right-of-way, and everyone else was there at their own risk. But changing the law was just the beginning. The real genius move was changing the culture. Enter the jaywalking campaign, which might be the most successful rebranding effort in American history. The auto industry took the word jay, which was basically 1920s slang for a clueless rural hick, and attached it to walking, to create a term that made crossing the street sound like something only an idiot would do. They funded publicity campaigns, planted stories in newspapers, and organized letter-writing efforts to make jaywalking sound like a public menace that needed to be stopped. Think about how insane this is. For thousands of years, walking wherever you wanted was considered a basic human activity. The auto industry managed to criminalize it in about a decade by making it sound stupid and dangerous. They didn't ban walking, they just made everyone embarrassed to do it wrong. It's like convincing people that breathing without permission is antisocial behavior. But wait, it gets worse. The auto industry also funded school safety programs that taught children that streets belonged to cars, and that getting hit by a car was probably their fault for being in the wrong place. These weren't neutral safety lessons. These were propaganda campaigns designed to make kids accept that they had no right to exist in public space unless they stayed on the narrow strips of concrete provided for their use. Imagine being 8 years old and learning that the space right outside your front door, where your parents and grandparents played when they were kids, was now enemy territory that could legally kill you if you used it wrong. That's not safety education. That's teaching children to surrender. The Cincinnati Speed Governor referendum, by the way, failed spectacularly. Auto interests outspent the safety advocates by enormous margins, and voters ultimately decided that making cars safer was somehow an attack on progress and freedom. Similar measures across the country met the same fate. Within a decade, the idea of restricting cars to protect people went from common sense to political suicide. And once the legal and cultural groundwork was laid, the physical transformation could begin. This is where it gets really depressing, because what happened next was essentially the complete reconstruction of American space around the assumption that everyone would travel by car, whether they wanted to or not. The Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956 created the interstate highway system, and with it, the idea that the highest use of urban land was moving cars through it as fast as possible. Cities across the country bulldozed entire neighborhoods, usually the poorest and least politically connected ones, to make room for 8-lane freeways that treated downtown like an obstacle course for suburban commuters. Meanwhile, local zoning codes started requiring minimum parking spaces for every new building, effectively making car ownership mandatory for anyone who wanted to live, work, or shop anywhere. These parking minimums weren't based on careful studies of actual need. They were just planners' wild guesses about how much asphalt America would need to keep the cars happy. Spoiler alert, they guessed high, and we've been living with the consequences ever since. Traffic engineers developed design standards that prioritized vehicle speed and volume over literally everything else. Streets got wider, intersections got bigger, sightlines got longer, and anyone trying to exist outside of a metal box got treated like a design afterthought. The Green Book, which is the federal guide for road design, basically assumes that the only reason pedestrians exist is to occasionally dart across traffic to get from one parking lot to another. By the 1970s, the transformation was complete. American cities had been rebuilt around an iron law. If you can't afford a car, you can't afford to participate in normal life. Want to get to work? You need a car. Want to buy groceries? You need a car. Want your teenager to have any independence or social life? They need a car. Want to visit friends, go to school, access healthcare, or basically leave your house for any reason? You definitely need a car. And here's the beautiful part, from the auto industry's perspective. Once you design a city where cars are mandatory, people stop thinking of car ownership as a choice. It becomes as natural and inevitable as having electricity or running water. The fact that you're spending $6,000 a year on car payments, insurance, gas, and parking just disappears into the background hum of adult life. It's not a subscription fee for participating in society, it's just what transportation costs. Except, of course, for the people who can't afford the subscription. Kids, elderly people, disabled people, poor people, people who can't drive for medical or legal reasons, all of them got quietly written out of the design equation. American cities became places where your access to jobs, housing, healthcare, and social connections was directly proportional to your access to a car. It's a mobility caste system, and most of us don't even notice it because we've been swimming in it our whole lives. Meanwhile, the people with money found ways to escape the worst consequences of car-dependent design. Rich neighborhoods got tree-lined streets with traffic calming measures. Poor neighborhoods got 6-lane arterial roads with bus stops that feel like punishment zones. Wealthy families could afford to live in walkable urban cores or quaint suburban downtowns. Everyone else got strip malls and subdivisions connected by highways that are basically slot canyons for cars. The isolation you feel sitting in traffic every day, the anxiety about parking, the way your neighborhood feels empty and dead except for the constant background noise of engines, the fact that your kid can't safely walk to school or the corner store, the way every social interaction requires coordinating transportation logistics. None of this is accidental. It's the predictable result of designing cities around machines instead of people. And the most insidious part is how this system makes its own failures look like personal problems. Stressed about your commute? You must need a better work-life balance. Feeling isolated in your suburban neighborhood? You should try harder to make friends. Worried about your kid getting hit by a car walking to school? You're being overprotective. Just drive them yourself. The system that created these problems also created the illusion that solving them is your individual responsibility. But here's what nobody talks about. This isn't how it works everywhere else. Cities in Europe, Asia, and even some parts of Canada managed to adopt cars without completely surrendering their streets to them. They have traffic, sure, but they also have places where children can play, where old people can sit on benches, where you can walk to get your daily needs met without feeling like you're risking your life. The difference isn't geography or culture or economic development. The difference is that they made different choices about who streets should serve. The streets weren't stolen by accident or by some inevitable march of technology. They were stolen by specific people making specific decisions that served their financial interests, often at the expense of everyone else's quality of life. The legal redefinition of streets, the cultural campaign against pedestrians, the infrastructure spending priorities that favored highways over transit, the zoning codes that made car ownership mandatory, all of this was policy, not destiny, which means it can be changed. Cities are already experimenting with removing parking minimums, converting car lanes to bus and bike lanes, redesigning intersections to be safer for pedestrians, and creating neighborhoods where you can actually live without a car. It's not about going back to some romanticized pre-automobile past. It's about remembering that streets are public space, and public space should serve the public, not just the people who can afford the latest model SUV. The exhaustion you feel navigating a city designed against human behavior isn't a character flaw or a sign that you're not tough enough for modern life. It's evidence that someone redesigned your world to serve their interests instead of yours, and then convinced you to blame yourself for the results. You don't have to accept it. The streets were stolen, but they can be taken back. It just requires remembering that before we gave up and surrendered our cities to traffic, we used to expect our neighborhoods to work for people, and we can expect that again. Thanks for watching, everyone. Hey there. If you enjoyed the video, go ahead and leave a comment telling me what you'd like to see covered next. This was Patrick, and as always, thanks for watching.